Our guest today is life coach and author Robert Pardi. He's sharing wisdom and lessons learned from his book, Chasing Life. You're connected with the heart of hospice. I'm Helen Bauer, here with Jerry Fenter.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. We'd like to thank today's sponsor, Funeralocity.com. It's hard to think about researching funeral homes when you're faced with the loss of a loved one. Funeralocity can help. At no cost to you, Funeralocity gives you the ability to compare the prices and services of every funeral home and cremation provider in your area and provide you with vast resources to assist in the funeral planning process. Find out more at Funeralocity.com.
I think this is going on my list, which is huge, of favorite interviews.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So today we're talking with Robert Pardi. We happened to come into contact with Robert, I think, through LinkedIn.
I think so.
And he has such an incredible story. So Robert was born in New York City. He's one of those rare people who embraces change, and he lives with what he calls possibility in action. He kind of uses that as his springboard for life, to move him into life. So he was telling us before the interview started, just as our conversation, ahead of actually pushing the record button, that he had been to Colorado recently and went skydiving.
He went skydiving, yeah.
Yeah, with a friend of his. And he said it was the most incredible experience. And he told us a little bit about it. And we're both sitting there going, you really did that, huh?
And I know people do that all the time. There are a ton of people who are adventure seekers, thrill seekers, and they do that all the time. And Robert and I, turns out, we're the same age, he and I. And I'm no more convinced that I need to get in a plane and jump out of a perfectly good aircraft after what he said. He said his goggles and his glasses blew off. And, of course, he had me at fell out of the plane.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, when you fall out of the plane.
Yeah, that's what he said. When you fall out of the plane, you don't immediately free fall. There's wind. And I'm like, so what? No thanks.
Right. So he is definitely into possibility and action.
Yes. He has an amazing story to tell that he's going to share about his experience and his journey with his wife, Desiree, who was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Lived with that, dealt with that, fought, he'll say, for 11 years before she passed away. And he was her caregiver in a very exceptional way. And
right.
He's going to tell all the details about that. I don't want to steal his thunder.
No. It's very unusual. From someone on the outside looking in, it seems very, very different than what we would expect of a woman who was a physician, and the way that she processed the information that she was receiving.
Yeah, the way they managed his role as her caregiver and her role in receiving the treatment that she did. And Robert was saying to us, talking about the extraordinary things that are done every day within ordinary caregiving circumstances. And so, Robert, if you're listening to this for the first time, we would tell you that you were one of those extraordinary caregivers, and you continue to be as you share Desiree's story.
Right. So Robert is a certified life coach. He is an adjunct professor and an international guest speaker, and of course, the author of Chasing Life. It's a remarkable true story of love, joy, and achievement against all odds. So here's our conversation with Robert Pardi. Robert, we're so glad to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much. No, this is a great honor for me, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we're going to jump right in. We've already told our audience about your book, Chasing Life, and about your wife and this amazing experience that you had as her caregiver. So tell us about Desiree and share a little bit about your journey with her.
For sure. Thank you for the opportunity, and I could talk about her for hours and hours. So I'll try to give you the summary, right? So I met Desiree. I call her Des. I met Des when she was 17, and I was 19. We met at university, and we just I don't know. We stretched each other. We challenged each other from the very, very beginning, which I wasn't used to growing up as an Italian American boy, at least back when I was a child. The roles were very clearly defined between men and women in my family, and we just were inseparable. Um, we decided to get married almost immediately, or at least I was pretty surprised. I told my mom about her a couple of weeks after I met her, and I'm like, I met the woman I'm going to marry. And that sounds crazy because of my age, but it was just one of those things where you sort of just, it all feels right. And we had that sort of gushy, always together, lovey-dovey relationship that makes a lot of people like sick to their stomach. They're like, "Oh my God, these two, they can't take their hands off of each other, or they're always together, or you're inseparable." Um, and Des wanted to pursue an MD, PhD. She was somebody that was always very thorough, which I think is part of the way everything unfolded, because she wanted to make maximum impact and do her best. So she's like, an MD is not going to be enough for me. I want both. I want to have the opportunity to also do research. At that point in time, I was an investment banker. My job was taking off. And while she was just about to finish her PhD, the way the program worked was 2 years of medical school, PhD, and then the last 2 years of medical school. So she had only done 2 years of medical school. She did her PhD. She was just finishing up. I was offered a job in the Middle East, and she said, "Well, we should take it because we love travel. We had very similar philosophies, having grown up very differently. But I had an amazing grandmother. Her name was Mary, and she told me from when I was a child to just be a gypsy, like pursue opportunity, pursue possibility. Don't be afraid to do anything." Which was very funny because she was my father's mother, and my father was a violent alcoholic, a very unhappy man. And here his mom was this happy go lucky, lost her husband, very early on. I never knew my grandfather, but yet she would jump on a bus, even though she didn't drive, to go see Philadelphia because she had never been. She was just, we wound up calling her Crazy Mary as she got older because we could joke with her, but she lived a very extraordinary life. So, in an extraordinary way. So, we decided that I should take the job in the Middle East. And Desiree's idea was that every 6 weeks we could meet in a different country while she was finishing her PhD, which sounded really romantic, right? And it was just beautiful. And it was a lot of fun. All the money I was supposed to save, I was not saving because we were meeting in a different country every 6 weeks. But then she decided to actually, when she finished her PhD, she said, I want to take a sabbatical for a year and come and live with you in the Middle East and experience the last year of your contract in the Middle East. Well, to live in the United Arab Emirates, you have to go through a medical screening, which they're basically screening you just for transmittable diseases more than anything else. Make sure you don't have tuberculosis or something like that. But because she had never really had a good physical in a long period of time, and she had found a lump a year before in her breast, she was 29 years old. Back in 1997, no doctor was going to send a 29-year-old woman for a mammogram. It just was not thought of back then. And she had history of cysts in her family and no history of breast cancer. So it was one of those things we just noticed and assumed it would go away. And, she thought it was maybe the sports bra because she was a runner. So in the Middle East, she goes for a physical and they want to do a needle aspiration. And when they did, no fluid came out. I had no idea what that meant, but I saw her face. And after the doctor left, I'm like, "Why are you so upset?" And she's like, "Well, because that's not a good sign." Even though the doctor, even in the Middle East, was saying, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Well, long story short, within a couple of weeks, she wound up having a radical mastectomy, and she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. She had 11 of 12 lymph nodes positive. Her tumor was the size of an egg. It was over 5 centimeters. Funny enough, 99% of it was regular tissue. It was just the tip, the tail, that was actually cancerous, and it was right near the lymph nodes. And it was an aggressive form of HER2 positive, estrogen negative breast cancer. And when she was diagnosed, and this is where Desiree's life philosophy was very, very interesting about, always wanting to do everything possible, just like with the MD, PhD. And also the way she lived her life, approaching everything by doing her best. She never really wanted to judge herself. And I think part of that came from a dynamic in her family. So she never knew the scores on any exam she took in university. She asked me to look. She didn't know her GPA. She didn't know the score on the MCATs. She only wanted to know she was ever doing her best. So when she was diagnosed and I asked her what she wanted to know, she said, Robert, I only want to know the next steps. I know enough to be dangerous to myself, and I want you to handle this for me. And it just seemed a natural flow. Of course, at that point, I was overwhelmed, but we were young. She wanted to be very aggressive. We were very optimistic people. And it was one of those things, we could beat it. So at that point, holding the information didn't seem so difficult. She went through traditional chemo, a stem cell transplant, mastectomy on the other side of her because she was off balance, let's say, during a certain period of time, because there was one healthy breast and they had left it because they only removed the breast that was infected. So she had to have all the reconstruction. And after all that, we went through that, which was like a 2-year process. There was a period in time that she was technically NED, no evidence of disease. She was considered in remission. I think she never was. Back then, PET scans really weren't used. So it was a CAT scan, and they're not as sensitive. We know that. So a couple months later, the cancer returned in her liver. That's when I fell apart for a moment, and I had to realize the journey changed. At the beginning of the diagnosis, it was the fighting it and we're going to get rid of it. And then it was, this is metastatic. This is stage 4. It's rare that people get through this. And so that led us on a really interesting journey where I think, and I can get teary-eyed saying it, because wow, did we become something special as a couple. Because all of a sudden we were both willing to be vulnerable and have conversations that nobody really wants to have. And it wasn't just around death, it was around intimacy. It's a pretty tough journey for a woman to go through breast cancer in general, because of the change in image, because of the feeling of femininity. She wound up going into menopause because of the stem cell transplant. So she was in her 30s with very fast moving menopause, and there were sexual problems around that. And we just developed this whole way of communicating, despite the fact that she never wanted to know anything. So I was being told, well, the cancer is now in her bones. The cancer is now in her lungs. The cancer is now in her small intestines. The cancer is now in her peritoneum. And the more we journeyed together, the more I realized that was the gift I can give her. My whole concept of caregiving changed, really, of what it actually meant to be a caregiver. And when she passed away, I didn't have, I guess, the traditional grief, because we talked a lot about, and you being, in hospice and understanding that, she educated me. I mean, I can pretty much speak about palliative care and hospice. While she had metastatic breast cancer, She became the founding director of palliative care at New York Hospital.
Wow.
And I was on that journey with her, and she taught me about it. And she explained to me, you don't extend death, you extend life. And life is a lot more than just the functioning of organs. It's the quality of life. It's being able to live the life that you want and that fulfills you. And it was such a deep understanding of that when she was in the hospital, she wound up being obstructed and couldn't go to the bathroom. And interestingly enough, she decided not to go to New York Hospital. And she said, I don't want to go to New York Hospital. I don't want my colleagues, because a lot of palliative care, a lot of hospice is about dignity. And she said, I don't want them giving me enemas and doing all those other things. The only other people I really knew to call were people at Mount Sinai, which is where she graduated. So they were still technically people she worked with, but they weren't the people that she would be teaching or training, right? So we went there, and I knew there were a lot of things I could do. I had learned a lot about medicine. I had an injection. I can't remember the name of it, but you can inject it and someone will have a bowel movement basically immediately. I had that with me, and I feared, okay, I could give this to her, but she could also perforate. So there was all this stuff in my mind, right? I knew she could have the surgery and have a bag, but we just, we're looking at each other, and she said, Robert, I'm tired. And I said, okay, baby, rest. And I knew she was telling me, even at the end of her journey, she was still directing everything while she didn't know specifics. And I knew she was asking me to transition to comfort care and not life sustaining, because she would never return to the quality of life she wanted, which was so clear. I mean, first and foremost, it was her job. I like to believe I was number two, but I don't know what the ranking was, but I want to say I was number two. Uh, that wouldn't have existed after this hospital stay.
Right. So your book, Chasing Life, is about your journey with Desiree through all of these circumstances and situations. But it's also part memoir, and it also is part just lessons that you learned on the journey. So why did you feel it was so important to share Desiree's story in the book? What do you hope that the readers will gain from reading the book?
That's a great question, and I know we're not doing this on video, but if people could see the goose pimples I have from that question, because after Desiree passed away, a friend of mine, which is the co-author, she said you should really write a book. And she's a woman we met while my wife was having her treatments. She was in the treatment room as well. Now, I don't think they would allow this anymore, but I was in the chair with my wife while she was getting chemo, and she'd be on my side, and I'd rub her back or something like that. And so I was always there. I never missed one treatment. And this woman watched a lot of that. So I said, yeah, I'm really not in that space. There were many reasons for that. And she said, well, just tell me some stories. And I told her some stories, and she showed up 3 years ago and said, I so think Desiree's story is important. Here is a skeleton if you feel like writing a book. During the pandemic, what I noticed was, and it wasn't just because people were passing away, it was more this journey of uncertainty that we were all going through, which was the journey that Desiree and I went through. At the end of the day, we had no idea what was going to happen. And being a caregiver is it's an extremely unusual position, because it is being hired for a job you have no training for. And the job function changes day to day.
Right.
It is overwhelming. It can make you feel, and the word I use all the time is, it can make you feel impotent, because we have this idea of wanting to fix, which is a completely different thing, which we could talk about. So I started thinking about how Desiree and I lived, because what the book is about, of course, it's a love story, and there's actually part of her last speech that she gave at VNS Hospice, and that's the last chapter of the book. But it was about how we learned to live in a state of joy despite adversity, and how so much of that is about conscious living. And I speak a lot about joy, and it's so misunderstood because, one, joy and happiness are not the same thing.
Right.
And what I hope is the book explains joy, but we all stop and look at a rainbow. Or even if a little kid is playing with bubbles and they float by us, we're caught by that one moment. That's when we lean into joy, because it's always there. You can't pursue joy. You have to lean into it. And what we did between the two of us is start to look at joy. And we became more children than we ever had been, which is strange, even though we were really being really responsible and dealing with such a big thing. But we learned how to bring in play. Like, as adults, we don't think of the idea of play. Go down a slide. I'm telling you, I just did it recently. Go down a slide. It's a lot of fun. Why not, right? But so the book is an example of, yes, us being a couple and dealing with certain things and lessons I learned. Surrender, for example, when Desiree her cancer recurred. Surprising, my dad was an alcoholic. I found myself drinking. I couldn't process what was happening. I couldn't understand the fact that I couldn't fix anymore. So I had to learn to surrender the outcome. I had to learn to realize that hope shouldn't really be future focused. Because when caregiving, parents are caregivers. But there's hope. So it's a pleasant journey. A child's going to grow up, is going to achieve, is going to get married, or whatever the case is, have children. The caregiver journey with an illness is you're approaching the darkness. You're approaching that end, that last bit, which we all, unfortunately, we all have that same endpoint. It just sometimes people don't wake up until they get that piece of paper and the doctor says you have something. But maybe we don't need that, right? So that's what the book is all about. It's about saying, okay, you know what? We were hopeful for a pleasant day, not 50 years in the future, but for today, for now. And one of the big lessons out of the book, which is woven through, is that you only live an extraordinary life when you value the ordinary moments. It's the ordinary moments that make life extraordinary.
Say that
it's
again.
It's not that one big trip you go on.
Would you say that again? That's remarkable. Say it again. So it's not the extraordinary
things?
I
could say it this way. So it's only when we value the ordinary moments that we live an extraordinary life.
Wow, that's great.
That
I
is.
love that. I love that.
So that's chasing life.
Yeah. Yeah. Very. Oh, man, I love that. That is great.
Hi, this is Gabby Jimenez of the Hospice Heart. I'm excited to let you know about an upcoming series on the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm partnering with Jerry and Helen at the Heart of Hospice to bring you a special 6-part series on grief. We'll be talking with industry experts Isabel Stencil and Lisa Paul of the Death Deck about common grief issues we're all dealing with. You'll hear information about when to seek professional help for your grief and how to navigate grief that seems to hang on for years. We're also going to discuss grieving for a loved one while you're a caregiver for someone else. There'll be tips for managing grief by journaling and how to comfort someone who is grieving. Isabel and Lisa will share insight into grief issues in children and young adults. Be sure to subscribe to the Heart of Hospice podcast so you don't miss this great series. And you can also connect with me at thehospiceheart.net. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
When you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, it can be challenging to find a funeral provider who will be a good fit for your needs. Funeralocity makes it easier. Through its Excellence Provider Program, you can find funeral homes in your area, compare services and prices, and make the choice that works for you. Burial and cremation providers go through a rigorous vetting process to be accepted as an excellence provider. They commit to upholding the highest standards and business practices. Funeralocity provides full price transparency so you can compare prices and services with confidence. Funeralocity.com is a great resource for hospice professionals, too. Its hospice portal offers resources for funeral planning, grief, and bereavement care, all at no charge. All you have to do is register on the Funeralocity website. Whether you're looking for the right funeral provider or supporting your patients and families as a hospice professional, Funeralocity provides all the information you need. It's the only site that has the prices of every funeral provider in America. Let Funeralocity.com help you and your family make the best choice for your funeral services. Now back to today's episode.
So, with Desiree's decision not to receive all of the information, instead kind of using you as the mediator or the messenger, if you will, how did that impact you? It seems odd looking at it from the outside for her, who's a physician herself and one who has, pursued information and education all these years. But when it comes to what's happening to her, she doesn't want to know these things. So it seems a little odd, for us looking from the outside. So how was that for you? Did you find that strange, or were you willing to take that role yourself?
That's a great question, because it sounds like it would be so heavy. And except for when it first occurred and I was thrown off kilter, let's say, it taught me, and I'll go back to answer the question, but it taught me that purpose really is when passion comes in alignment with your values and you want to give the results away. It's not holding on to it. So what I was doing was purposeful. Everything I was doing was, the results were for her to actually live her life. And it taught me a lot about what it meant to be a caregiver. But I jumped right into it because, to a certain extent, the whole thing with her grades and everything else, this didn't seem like it was going to be any big deal. And, at that moment, it was, okay, we're going to do the chemo and everything aggressive, and it's going to go away. And who cares what size the tumor was? Who cares what chemo you were on? It doesn't matter. Wash our hands and we move on with our life. When it recurred and I was gathering more information about it spreading, or about when her oncologist called me to his office and he never did that to discuss the results, I cried the whole 9 blocks. I walked into that office. Everyone was teary-eyed. We all knew what the conversation was going to be. And he told me that, this would be the moment that we would send somebody to hospice. And he said to me as well, he goes, but that's not who she is. And that's palliative care, right? Seeing the person, not the disease. And so that allowed me to see her. All of it was such an amazing lesson. Was it hard to hear that information? It was, but I had learned to surrender, which was extremely important. I had learned that it was today that was important, and let's make today good. And she wound up living another 18 months from that point that she should have gone into hospice. But he told me I would have to become her hospice. I learned how to flush a port. I learned how to put TPN, connect TPN. I learned how to draw blood. There was all kinds of things we were doing in the house that caused problems as well, because she would fight sometimes and say, Robert, I don't want to be married to a parent. And I had to deal with that balance. That's not easy. Also, as a guy, right? All of a sudden, you're taking care of her. And I knew that the whole intimacy things, certain things were painful. And so I didn't know if I should approach her or not approach her. I wanted to know that I wanted to be with her and I loved her and she was beautiful. But then I knew also she would have to say no. And so, there's a big dance. But was it difficult? I I never remembered it being difficult because there was a great purpose behind it. And I knew every time she'd say, wow, there was this great patient and, this great thing happened. And I knew, wow, that happened also because I'm holding all of this for her. And that person benefited from her being a doctor. So, it's sort of removing the ego, right? Which it's very hard to define what the ego is, but it's sort of saying that I don't factor into this equation. And that's how I looked at it.
Yeah. It was the removal of self because you put her first. That's very humbling.
It is. It is. Being a caregiver in so many ways is unique to every person because the situation is unique. The people who are involved in it have their own experiences and past experiences. Like you were talking about with the intimacy, that's going to be unique to each couple as well. So it's very hard at times to say, okay, well, everybody's caregiving experience is going to be the same. No, it's not. It can't be. Now, are there some similarities? Probably. So let me ask you this about the caregiving experience. What would you say are some of the most important lessons that you learned being Desiree's caregiver?
Sure. I also just want to acknowledge what you said because it is so important. Everyone's journey is different. I think the biggest thing about being a caregiver is that what I talked about earlier, the uncertainty. It's a job you're not trained for. And you might not sleep for 48 hours but at the end, the common thread for all caregivers is not knowing. And you'll spend a gazillion hours on the internet trying to know, trying to learn, what's the best thing I should do? My wife, like with mouth sores or certain things. And I don't know how I came up with it. She would always have a bad taste in her mouth from chemo. And one day I said, well, why don't you brush your teeth with sparkling water, like seltzer? And that actually helped her. Why? I don't know, but I was grasping at straws. So I think that's the common thing. But the lessons I learned, there were so many actually, but what I would say first and foremost is the biggest lesson I learned is caregiving has nothing to do with fixing at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Caregiving is 100% supporting someone to confront their journey. And it's not easy. It's because you want to fix and you don't want to see someone suffer. And your life is being put on hold. I eventually had to leave work. There was just no way around it, especially when I had to, quote, become her hospice. But the idea of fixing, and I might be speaking more from a guy's point of view because my clients that I've worked with that are male caregivers, it is all about that fixing. Like, how do I make it better? How do I make her better? And basically, it's just being there to witness, to listen. The person doesn't want to disappear as a patient that you're caring for. They want to be that person they were.
Right.
And they need someone to witness and acknowledge what they're going through. And that takes a lot. The second thing would be communication. It's not easy at all to have certain conversations. But without that, you're not together in the space. And that was something very important that I learned very early on. And not because I had to hide the information, but because we had to understand where we were and understanding each other's needs. The third one for sure would be self-care. I suffered from the Superman complex like you'll have no idea. I will stay awake 24/7. I will never sleep, and I will make sure you're breathing okay. And and I'll also be I didn't have children, but our dog was sick for a while, and I'll take care of the dog too, and anybody else that wants to come in the room because I can do it all. And I didn't stop. And what winds up happening is that it becomes so overwhelming that then, because you're trying to take on so much and you're not caring for yourself, you're breaking things down into tasks. And something very interesting came out from that for me. giving myself space to care for myself helped me see the opportunity in caregiving instead of the obligation. And that's a theme that I carry through to my life today. If I feel demotivated by something or I don't have the energy to do it, I'm looking at it as an obligation. I'm not looking at it as an opportunity. And only through giving myself space, self-care, was I able to remove myself from all the tasks that I created. And they were tasks. I mean, putting the pill in the pill boxes and making sure, and, texting my wife during the day. Did you take this? Did you drink this shake? Did you do this? I didn't need to do that. I could have taken that time to do something for myself.
Sure.
Whether it was go for a run, whether it was meditate, whether it was whatever else you want to do. So those are I'd say the three key things I learned as a caregiver.
Yeah. So one of the things that you would have done differently is practice better self-care?
I think I probably would have at the beginning, added more self-care. But for me, the biggest thing was the fixing. If I would have let that go and understood that earlier on, I think she and I could have avoided some fights. For sure. Sugar, for example, she'd want a donut and I'd be like, but sugar feeds cancer. No, but because I wanted everything to just be perfect and fix it. And if I can control all these little things, it was all going to be okay.
Right.
And we had that. We spent a lot of time in India. Desiree amazingly would get chemo on a Friday morning and we'd get on a plane Friday evening and fly to India. And she was like, well, hey, the chemo, I'm going to be knocked out anyway, so let's fly, So I'd get her on the plane. And I remember the first time she wanted to do it, I was thinking in my head, India, your immune system, you can't drink the water. And her oncologist is like, yeah, no problem. You know what? We went with him. And I'm like, you're all crazy. We can't do this. Because I was worried about keeping everything perfect. And so that's, if I look back, if I would have learned that lesson earlier, I think it would have helped us not, let's say, waste time. And this is something amazing about a cancer journey or an illness journey. We learned how to let go of the unnecessary, but I think we would have learned that faster if I would have given up the need to fix.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. One of the things that we often talk about in hospice to the caregivers especially is, it's okay if your loved one wants to do things that normally would have been unhealthy. Let's just put it that way.
Sure.
At this point, if it's what gives them satisfaction, if it gives them joy, if it makes them happy, okay, it's fine. Let them do that.
Right. That's just quality of life.
It is. Sure. It's providing quality of life. And I think that's kind of what we are hearing you say is that, by not trying to fix it, you're saying it's okay for us to do this. It's okay for her to have the donut. It's okay to fly to India because it's what brings satisfaction. It brings some joy and happiness there. So I think that's something good for our listeners to hear, is that this is indeed the way hospice should be. It's an improvement of a person's quality of life. And so that's good.
Yeah. So I'm going to chime in as the lone female in this conversation.
Okay.
I'm a pretty opinionated, I'm sure my husband would tell you that, vocal, I'm going to manage my own stuff, raised by strong-minded women, and I raised two strong-minded women. And at first, when I read your story about how Desiree made the decision to not let the information about her prognosis and diagnosis, her test results, to not let that into her psyche. She didn't want that in her mental processing. At first I thought, wow, why would a woman give up that kind of, I'll say, control, right? Because I thought, well, I would never let my husband handle that. I'm in charge of that and he'll never get it right. It would be that kind of thing. You know, so that was a really different and unusual choice for a woman to make. And I think a lot of women would say, I wouldn't do that. But you seem to find a place of great comfort, great contentment. You were comfortable in that space with Desiree. After going through all of this with her, if it was your choice to have to deal with information like that, would you choose to deal with a serious illness the same way? Would you want to have someone else hold that information for you?
Well, that's a question, isn't it?
Yeah, to put you on the spot.
So, but I want to circle back just for a second, because I think, Desiree was so super intelligent, and anyone would tell you that I was wrapped around her finger. So if anyone was controlled, like, she knew she got me under control, right? But I think she had an uncanny ability to weigh options and risks. And so the risk that she would do to herself, knowing, was greater than the risk of giving it to me. Knowing she could guide me, and we had those very clear discussions. So I think, if anything, she was in a great seat of power in that, because she was so conscious of herself and what was best for her. And Jerry, I just want to go back about caregiving for a second, because with the self-care thing, what I'd love to throw in there as well is what I realized through self-care is we have to stop this focus on our best as 100%. Our best is however we show up that day. If the intention is our best, there's no measurement of that. So one of the things I did learn through self-care was, you know what? If I don't sleep, my best might be 30%. If I do sleep, maybe it's going to be 60. So what are those things I can do to augment my best, but not expect 100 all the time, because we can't run flat out at 100. Nope. So that just came to my mind, so I wanted to say that. But so to this great question, I've thought a lot about that for a number of different reasons. And for my wife, it was a coping mechanism for sure, to not have that, let's say, noise.
Yeah.
I wonder if I would even go down the chemo route, to tell you the truth, personally. If I was diagnosed with something like that, I might say, no, thank you. Because of when maybe it happens, and, where am I in my life, and will it make my life better for the next 20 years or something? So I think I would not be traditional at all. And I probably, also having walked the benefit of seeing my wife not knowing and how well she did. I mean, it was very unusual for a woman to be diagnosed, before, right around her 31st birthday, and live with cancer for 11 years without all the medicines we have today for metastatic breast cancer. So I wonder if the mental state really had so much bearing on that. So the unclear answer is I would be open to that option. Personally, I'll be very honest. I'm open to the option of medical assisted end of life. I think that's a choice. And so all of these things of how Desiree dealt with it or didn't deal with it, it's like you said about no caregiving journey is the same. No illness journey is the same. And we don't have medicines to personalize the journey, but we should give options to personalize the journey. We did have a doctor, we interviewed a lot of doctors telling them, I'm the person. You don't speak to my wife. She went in, she told them that as well. We had one doctor that basically wanted to tell her all the information as soon as Desiree sat down. And Desiree got up and left the room, and I don't know how I didn't throw the doctor out of the window. But, that's unique to her, because we're all unique. And part of, I think, what is so hard about dealing with illness is we become a victim to the treatment, because we're all pushed into a box to deal with it a certain way. Just like we're pushed into a box to grieve a certain way. We're pushed into a box. It can't be. And the more we allow those options, so I would be 100% open to saying, do I want to know? Do I want to treat it? 100%.
Yeah, that is incredible to me because I've never thought about that in those terms, because we talk all the time about how grieving is different. It's unique to every person. I never thought about it in the terms that you're talking about, where treatment should be just as unique as the person too, because too often it's all about, well, you have this disease. This is what we're expecting to do. This is just a treatment plan for this disease.
Yeah.
And we don't come at it from the perspective of, what do you want as the patient? And
I love what you just said, by the way. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's good. Go right ahead.
You used the word expecting. The medical, and I'm not faulting the medical system at all. I mean, it has become very transactional. So we're all involved in it, right? I'm broken, fix me.
Right.
I have diabetes. Give me a pill so I can continue to eat my donuts. You know, we've gotten into this. We've gotten into this dynamic, right? But that idea of, you use the word expecting, and what I remembered seeing is the system was expecting my wife to show up in a certain way because that's how they treat. And I think it is changing now, where you sit down and you try to understand, what is life to a person? What does it really mean? Because that's what you're technically, and I don't like the word fighting for, but that's what you're fighting for when you're confronted with a disease. But if nobody knows what that means to you, you're lost in the system and you're just following a path that might not be right. And that's not saying to not do treatment or do treatment, but it's more having that conversation of, you know, what can I do for you? I'll tell you an amazing story, and I know we've been running over, but we changed oncologists midstream because when my wife's cancer recurred, I wanted her to be more aggressive. She loved her oncologist, who was a great guy. But, you know, I was reading a lot more about supplements and herbs and all kinds of other things. I'm like, you know, we got to find one of those people. So we did. And my wife was like, that guy's that's a quack. I'm not going there. Even though he did traditional chemo, he was a hematologist and everything else. She's like, yeah, no, I heard he has incense in his office and he has music. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to go see him. You got to do it for me, is basically what I said. She sat down and he said, what do you want to know? And she said, am I going to die? And I was like, oh God, just go right out the window right now.
Wow.
This is a mistake. And he said, he's like, of course you are, but I can't tell you when. He said, let me ask you a different question. What can I do for you? And he kept pounding and pounding and pounding until she said, I need more energy. I want to make sure I can continue to do my job. And he said, well, that's something we can start with. And that helped support quality of life for her. Now, he was not a palliative care physician, but that's a tenet of palliative care, right?
Yes.
Is that whole idea of supporting quality of life,
Right.
Dignity, pain management, everything else. But so her journey was palliative care before she even became palliative care, or before we even knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because we ensured that people looked at her life. She was flying. I would come back for chemo. We would fly back to Abu Dhabi, and she wore, before they were fashionable, she would wear a mask on the plane. And, most doctors told her, no, you can't do that, until we found a doctor that said, yeah, and this is what you'll need to do. And, you'll have to go get blood work as soon as you land, and then 3 days afterwards. And so it's very important to understand the person,
Right.
the person before the patient.
I think, as a nurse, what I hear is, we like to think that we craft an individualized treatment plan for a patient when they come to us, regardless of whether they're seeking aggressive treatment or whether it's hospice. But sometimes all we do is fill in a protocol. This is standard, and it's not individualized. And creating that expectancy instead of expectation, and it's all about listening and what that individual, what that person, not the patient, what the person wants, is such a big part of what we do. And I don't know that we're all that good at that. So I think Desiree's story is definitely a lesson in all of those things.
Thank you for saying that, because I definitely believe it is. It taught me a lot. And I think we are getting there. Just, another example of those protocols. The standard treatment she knew was going to be Cytoxin, Adriamycin, and Taxol, I think. Those were the three. Cytoxin, I know it was a C, so I'm going to say Cytoxin. And she said to the doctor, she said, you know what? Can we do Adriamycin, Cytoxin, and Taxol? Does it matter the order? And he said, well, it really shouldn't change the efficacy at all. Why such an odd request? She said, because I wanted to spell act. Now, that was important to her.
Right. And if it didn't make any difference to the physician and the treatment plan itself, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? It's just a mental, an imagery, an attitude, definitely.
Yeah. You have given us so much in this little time that we've had together. It is powerful. I have. There was a moment here just a minute ago. I was having goosebumps myself. It was so good. It's great. So we've got one last question for you.
And you don't know about this question. We added this on at the last minute.
We did.
Okay.
So we were looking at your book, and the cover has a caramel-covered apple on it. Tell us about why the caramel-coated apple.
Oh man, you're gonna almost make me cry here, because Desiree was born. Yesterday was her birthday, so and we got married in October, and October was extremely important to us for just a number of reasons, and the colors and everything else. So I was being told that the cover should be a couple running on a beach holding hands, because chasing life. And I said, but that's not what chasing life is about. Chasing life is about including moments of joy. It's not about measuring life on the number of years, actually. Desiree did not live a short life. She lived a full, accelerated, joyful life. People can live until their 90s and have no joy. I don't know how happy or what measure of life that is. So the caramel apple was something that wound up being very important when we first met, because it was a way to keep my wife occupied when I ran and tried to get the engagement ring. But it was something that when I would give it to her, I always bought her one, or we would be in a store and she'd jump up and down like a little girl and clap her hands, and she's like, "Oh, it's caramel apple time!" and she'd get all excited. And so it's the perfect representation of joy, because it's a story of a woman that I wish was still with me. Like, I miss her every single day, and she is with me, of course, but just that smile and the conversations and the hugging and the kissing and all of the stuff that's all involved. But that was all about us living in a state of joy. And so that's the caramel apple. Though people were like, what does that have to do with a woman dying of breast cancer? I'm like, it has to do with living around breast cancer.
Right.
The journey has to be living. That's what we do it for.
Yeah.
So that's the caramel apple.
Yeah. And so chasing life. Yeah. That's perfect.
That's wonderful. Robert, tell our listeners how they can find you, how they could work with you if they wanted to, and how they can find your book.
Sure. We'll start with the last question. So the book, they can just go to chasinglifethebook.com, and it's only available on Amazon, self-published. And so excuse the typos. I'll say that right now. For me, they could just go to my website, which is robertpardi.com, and they could connect with me there. And I'm not a big Instagram or Facebook user. I tend to be on LinkedIn all the time. So, people could reach out to me there as well.
Awesome. We'll have links to your sites in the show notes too, so people can get a hold of you easily.
Great.
Robert, thank you so much for your time today. This has really been such a joy to have you and to communicate with you like this and to share all these things with you. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend it with us.
No, thanks to the both of you. This was fantastic, really. Thanks.
So my philosophy is if somebody cries during the interview, whether it's the guest or one of the hosts or both of the hosts, then it's a successful interview.
Okay, so who cried in this one?
I got nothing to say. It was just amazing. It's a very moving story. It truly is.
Yeah, he had so many gems of wisdom.
Yeah, these little nuggets of wisdom that he has gleaned from this life experience as a caregiver. And I love it that he's willing to share so much of it. He talked about their intimate life, their physical intimate life. They were young people. They were a young married couple. And just I won't say risks that they took. That would be the knee-jerk way to describe some of the things that they did. Where, like when he talked about they went to India, they would fly and travel.
Yes.
For them, it wasn't a risk. It was a life. It was a full life.
Very full, yes. And so that was part of the struggle that he had, was because he's like, we shouldn't be doing this because it's going to be bad for her. Her immune system is completely shot from the chemo, and so she's going to India where you can't even drink the water there, and so he was concerned about her. And that was one of the other gems of wisdom that I gleaned from our conversation, is how he said, as a caregiver, especially for a caregiver of a terminally ill person, you can't fix this.
Yeah,
you can't fix it.
And he was saying men typically, they're the fixers. What if you're a caregiver that's also the parent? Because we do that as well. I'm the mom, right? I'm going to fix this for my child.
Absolutely.
You can't fix the unfixable.
Right. And so what can you do? Well, improve the quality of life. Give them the joy. Give them the trip. Give them the donut.
Well, maybe not the donut.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm looking forward to. If I ever have a terminal illness, I want donuts.
I'm so not going to let you do that, right?
Why not? Why not?
I don't let you have them now.
Exactly.
So check out Robert's website, robertpardi.com. And you can find his book, chasinglifethebook.com, on his website for the book. And you can also buy it on Amazon. We'll have a link to all of the sites in our show notes. And you can connect with Robert on LinkedIn as well.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Fenter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.